By the time I stepped through the glass doors of the Skyline Terrace ballroom, the air was already thick with the mingled scents of champagne, cologne, and the kind of flowers you have to order 2 weeks in advance. The soft, golden light spilling in from the windows gave everything a glow, but it didn't warm me. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I paused to take it all in. White tablecloths, towering arrangements of hydrangeas, the sweeping view of Puget Sound shimmering just beyond the glass. This was supposed to be a celebration, my graduation party, but the way the evening began made me feel more like an extra in someone else's show. I caught sight of my parents across the room, Grady and Noela Kelm, moving from guest to guest like seasoned politicians, every handshake deliberate, every smile camera-ready. They looked like the perfect hosts, and I suppose to everyone else, they were. But I knew better. I smoothed the front of my dress, forcing my shoulders back. "You've got this," I murmured to myself, though the words tasted more like armor than encouragement. I made my way toward the main stage where a well-dressed man with a microphone was warming up the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "let's give a warm welcome to the Kelm family." My parents rose immediately when he mentioned my older sister, Cyrene. Applause broke out as he praised her remarkable contributions to the family business and her tireless dedication to community service. Grady clapped like she'd just won an Olympic medal, and Noela's smile practically lit the room. Then the MC turned toward me. "And here's their youngest daughter, fresh from completing her degree." He didn't say my name, my parents didn't stand. They smiled politely, gave a few small claps, and stayed seated as if the energy it took to stand was too precious to waste. A hush settled over my corner of the room, followed by a polite ripple of applause that faded almost as quickly as it began. I kept my chin high, walking toward the front with an even pace. In my head, I heard my Aunt Renata's voice. Dignity is not negotiable. When the introductions were over, guests broke into smaller conversations. A couple of my friends made their way over, offering light chatter about the venue and the food, trying to lift my mood. I thanked them, but inside I felt the shift. The tone had been set, and it wasn't in my favor. A few minutes later, the photographer called for a family photo. We lined up in front of an elaborate floral backdrop. As the camera focused, Noela leaned in so close I could feel her perfume wrap around me. "Smile, Leech," she whispered, her lips barely moving. I froze for half a second, then forced the same smile I'd been wearing since I walked in. The flash went off, capturing the moment forever, the carefully arranged tableau, the fake warmth, and me in the middle, holding it together. I wondered if she was trying to provoke me into reacting. If I snapped here, in front of everyone, it would only confirm whatever narrative they'd prepared. So I stayed still, remembering Renata's other piece of advice. Sometimes you win by letting them think you've lost. As we stepped away from the photo area, I scanned the room. Clusters of guests stood around high-top tables, glasses in hand. Some smiled at me warmly, others avoided my eyes altogether. I started cataloging faces, who was close to my parents, who kept their distance, and who might actually be neutral. That's when I saw Hollis, my oldest friend, standing near the back with their camera. They caught my eye and raised an eyebrow, a silent question. "You okay?" I gave a small nod. Hollis had always been good at reading between the lines, and the fact that they had their camera out told me they were already paying attention. I made my way to the refreshment table, poured a glass of water, and took a slow sip. Across the room, my parents stood together, watching me. They exchanged a glance, a small, knowing look, and then went back to charming the people around them. I held their gaze for just a moment longer before turning away. If this was how they chose to start the evening, I could only imagine what they had planned next. The applause from the introductions had barely faded when the host invited everyone to find their seats for dinner. I threaded my way through the crowd, careful not to spill the water in my hand, offering polite nods to relatives and acquaintances. Most smiled back with the kind of courtesy that fills gaps in small talk but means nothing. A few kept their eyes fixed elsewhere, already engrossed in their conversations. The ballroom was a labyrinth of round tables draped in white linen, each adorned with candles and delicate arrangements. I glanced at the place cards as I passed, names written in looping gold script. The closer I moved toward the back, the more I felt the truth of something an old mentor once told me. Seating charts are quiet declarations of rank. Finally, I spotted my name. My table was tucked directly beside the double doors, swinging into the kitchen. Every time a server pushed through, a wave of heat and the clang of metal trays followed. The smell of seared fish and garlic butter drifted over me, not unpleasant, but it was hard to imagine anyone else here enjoying their meal to the sound of shouted orders and clattering pans. From my vantage point, I had a clear line of sight to the center of the room, where Cyrene sat beside our parents at the largest table, a place of honor. She was laughing at something our father had just said, head tilted back, her hair catching the light in a way that would have looked perfect on a magazine cover. She thrived in settings like this. A server squeezed past me, nearly bumping my chair. "Sorry, miss," he murmured before disappearing into the kitchen. I shifted closer to the table, resisting the urge to scoot entirely out of the way. If they wanted me hidden here, I wasn't going to make myself smaller. I rested my hand on the cool linen and took a slow breath. This wasn't new. They'd done it before in smaller ways, subtle positioning, quiet omissions, but tonight, everything was heightened. I told myself there would be better moments to make an impression, and I would take them when they came. The first course was being served when Cyrene appeared at my side, wineglass in hand. She leaned in with that effortless charm she wore like perfume, her smile warm enough for anyone watching. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she murmured, voice low and sweet. "This is your last time at the center of anything." I met her gaze, letting the weight of her words settle. Out loud, I answered lightly, "I've always preferred the view from the edge. It's where you see the whole game." I saw her smile tighten for half a beat before she tossed her hair and drifted back to her table, clearly satisfied she'd landed her blow. I let my eyes wander across the room. A cousin 2 tables over was smirking. An older aunt looked down at her plate as if she hadn't heard a thing. And then there was Hollis, leaning against a column near the far wall, watching the exchange with a look that said, "I saw that." They gave me the smallest of nods, a silent reminder that not everyone in the room was against me. I took another sip of water, letting the coolness steady me. The night was still young, and if the first act was any indication, they had more lined up. I just wondered how many little cuts they intended to deliver before the night was over. Dinner had been served, though I'd barely touched the food. From my seat tucked near the kitchen doors, I pushed the roasted vegetables around with my fork, half listening to the hum of cutlery and conversation. The jazz trio in the corner played something smooth and low, almost swallowed by the constant swing of the doors beside me and the bursts of heat that came with them. Across the room, my parents leaned in toward a man I recognized immediately, a local magazine editor I'd met just a month ago. He'd been polite and genuinely curious about my capstone project in environmental engineering. 2 weeks earlier, he'd told me they were running a feature on it. Curiosity got the better of me. When a server passed, I rose and made my way toward the table, keeping to the edge so I didn't intrude. That's when I saw it, the glossy new issue of the magazine lying open between them. There was my project, the diagrams, the photo of the river cleanup site I'd worked on for months. Only, the name in bold wasn't mine, it was Cyrene's. A small, sharp heat bloomed in my chest. Before I could say anything, a voice at my elbow said, "Your sister's work is impressive. I had no idea she was into environmental science." I turned to find one of my father's colleagues smiling at me as if expecting agreement. I steadied my voice. "Yes, she's very good at presentation." I let the pause hang just long enough for the words to taste pointed without crossing the line into open confrontation. My father's laughter from the head table carried across the room. Cyrene was in the middle of a story, gesturing with perfect poise, the editor leaning forward, engaged. She could play the role of accomplished professional as if she'd been born into it. I knew if I interrupted now, I'd be painted as the jealous little sister. So I sat back down, reminding myself of what a professor once told me. People will steal your spotlight if you let them, but they can't take what you know. I'd barely refocused on my plate when my mother's voice rose above the murmur. "Oh, this reminds me," Noela began, smiling sweetly to her table. "When Arlena was in her 2nd year, she almost got herself expelled. skipped mandatory seminars for weeks. Can you imagine? A ripple of polite laughter followed. A few guests looked my way, some amused, others clearly uncomfortable. I set my fork down. Actually, I said evenly, I was in Europe on an academic exchange, approved and sponsored by the department chair. My tone stayed mild, the kind you use when you're simply correcting a harmless mistake. But I suppose that version isn't as entertaining. Noela's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly before she turned back to her companions. I sat back, fingers wrapped around my water glass. None of this was accidental. Every public jab, every quiet redirection of credit, it was all part of the same campaign. My Aunt Renata's voice floated into my memory. Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. I wasn't here to defend every strike. I was here to remember, to choose my moment. The trio shifted into something livelier as servers began clearing plates. I glanced toward the far side of the room. Hollis was standing near a column, one hand resting casually on their camera strap, the other signaling me with a subtle motion. Their expression was unreadable, but it wasn't casual. I straightened in my chair. Whatever they'd seen, I had a feeling it was going to matter. The room dimmed, and the low hum of conversation tapered off as the screen above the stage flickered to life. My stomach tightened. Years of these family presentations had taught me one thing. They weren't just sentimental slideshows. They were curated narratives. Soft piano music played over the speakers as images began to roll. Christmas mornings, vacation snapshots, milestone dinners. The years scrolled past in carefully selected fragments. The warmth of the lighting couldn't hide the cold truth. I started counting. 1 holiday without me. 2. A birthday party where I knew I'd been there, yet the picture framed only my parents and Cyrene. Then came the one that made my breath catch, my high school graduation photo. I remembered the moment vividly, standing in my cap and gown surrounded by classmates, my family to one side. But on screen, the group shot had been cropped so that only Cyrene remained, smiling with my diploma in her hand, as if it had been hers all along. When they erase you from the frame, I thought, they're telling everyone you were never part of the story. A few guests glanced in my direction. One older cousin frowned, her gaze lingering, while others avoided my eyes altogether. I held my expression neutral, tucking the sting away where it couldn't be seen. There was no need to react now. Every omission was becoming part of my own quiet record. The music faded, and my father rose for his toast. He began with the usual pleasantries, thanking everyone for attending. Then his tone shifted, just slightly. "We've worked hard as a family to support our daughters," he said, raising his glass, "especially covering the tens of thousands for Arlena's education. It wasn't always easy, but you do what you must for your children." The words slid into the room like a needle. At my table, 2 of my friends exchanged quick glances. One started, "Didn't you get—" But I cut them off with a small shake of my head. Inside, I was replaying the truth. The scholarships I'd earned, the grants I'd fought for, the part-time jobs squeezed in between classes. Yes, they'd helped, but the number he threw out was fiction, designed to make me look like a burden they had heroically carried. I took a deliberate sip of water, letting the glass shield my face for a moment. My mentor's voice came to mind. "Never wrestle with pigs. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it." There was no point in publicly correcting him now. The people who mattered would eventually see the truth. Applause rose and fell around me. I set my glass down and caught sight of Aunt Renata across the room. She wasn't clapping. Instead, she gave me a small, steady nod, one that held more meaning than any toast. I wondered what she knew and how much she was ready to say. I stayed near the back wall, letting the crowd move around me. The air was still heavy with the polite applause for my father's speech, and I could feel the echo of his words about my debt replaying in my head. The slideshow's omissions had been a wound. That public rewriting of my life was salt rubbed straight in. A couple of friends brushed past, giving my arm a reassuring squeeze. Their smiles were brief, almost apologetic, like they knew standing too close to me might earn them a place in the next round of family politics. I didn't blame them. No one wants to be collateral damage. At the dessert table, a group of my father's business associates lingered over chocolate mousse and glasses of port. One of them, a man I'd met once at a charity gala, turned to me with a grin. "Your dad tells us you've been keeping him busy paying tuition bills. Must have been worth every penny." The laugh from the group was light, but it landed like a slap. I set my glass down before I answered. "Actually," I said, keeping my tone warm but unyielding, "I covered most of my tuition with scholarships and grants. Worked 2 part-time jobs the rest of the way. My father's contribution was appreciated, but let's just say sometimes people spend more on the story than the reality." The words settled between us, and for a moment the man's smile faltered. 2 others exchanged a look that told me they'd heard more in my tone than just casual clarification. Over his shoulder, I saw my father watching from across the room, jaw tightening just enough for me to catch it. The shift in the air was subtle but unmistakable. Conversations in my immediate circle softened, as if everyone sensed the temperature had just dropped a degree. Cyrene drifted over, all polished charm, and launched into an unrelated story about a client of hers trying to redirect the attention. But there was a stiffness in her posture I hadn't seen earlier. I took the opportunity to step away, but before I could make it back to my table, my mother intercepted me. She caught my arm, her grip firm enough to make me stop. Her smile was fixed, all hostess grace for the eyes that might be watching, but her voice was low and edged in sugar. "Don't you dare make a scene tonight. You'll regret it." I met her gaze, letting the silence stretch just enough for her to feel it. "A scene," I said evenly, "is just truth with better lighting." Her smile didn't drop, but the muscles around her eyes tightened. She released my arm and glided away, resuming her circuit of the room as if nothing had passed between us. I stood there for a moment, feeling the accumulation of the night pressing in. Every cropped photo, every public barb, every casual erasure. I realized I was done playing defense. They had been setting the stage all evening. Maybe it was time I thought about flipping the script. Maya Angelou's words came back to me. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I believed them now. And I wasn't going to forget a single thing I'd seen. Scanning the room, I spotted Hollis again. This time, they weren't just watching. They had their phone raised slightly, the glow of the screen reflecting in their glasses. When our eyes met, they gave the smallest nod, like they were holding on to something I needed to see. I couldn't tell yet if it was the opening I'd been waiting for, but I knew I'd be ready if it was. I had just turned from the dessert table when I caught sight of Aunt Renata moving toward me. She wove through the crowd with deliberate grace, her smile polite, but her eyes fixed on me. When she reached my side, she didn't stop to exchange pleasantries. Instead, she brushed her hand against mine, leaving behind a small, sealed envelope. Not a word, just a firm look that said later. I slipped away from the main floor, careful not to draw attention. The balcony doors stood ajar, letting in a cool breath from the sound. I stepped into the shadowed corner and opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies, scholarship award letters, grant confirmations, receipts with my name and student ID. Every document told the truth. I had earned my way, piece by piece. A note in her looping handwriting was tucked on top. For when they pushed too far. My pulse steadied. Until now, I'd been reacting, absorbing each jab and deciding when to respond. This felt different, like the first real move on my own board. I slid the papers back into the envelope and tucked it deep into my clutch. They wouldn't see it coming. When I stepped back inside, the ballroom was a haze of laughter, glassware clinking, and the low hum of conversation that fills a room before the next act. My parents stood with Vela Stroud, their cousin and tonight's event coordinator. Grady's hand rested on Vela's shoulder, Noella leaning in as if they were conspiring over something important. Hollis appeared at my side. "You've heard about the invitations, right?" they asked in a low tone. I frowned. "What about them?" "They printed your start time 30 minutes later, just yours. Several guests told me they thought they were early, but by the time they arrived, the first photos were done. Made it look like you showed up late to your own party." The realization landed with the weight of inevitability. "Of course," I murmured. A late arrival, no name in the introduction, and now the slideshow omissions. They hadn't just been improvising tonight. They'd built a sequence. "They're playing the long game," Hollis said. "Then I'll change the rules," I replied. The band struck up something light as servers began placing plates for dessert. I glanced toward the center of the room. My father checked his watch, then looked to my mother, who gave Vela a small nod. It was the kind of signal you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. I was looking. Whatever was next, I intended to be one step ahead. From my seat, I kept one eye on the dessert plates being set down and the other on my parents. They'd been glancing at me more often, exchanging looks that weren't meant for anyone else to read. Hollis caught my attention from across the room and tilted their head toward the side hallway. The look on their face wasn't casual. I rose slowly, weaving past chatting guests, and followed their lead toward the service corridor near the kitchen. The clatter of dishes and the muffled voice of a server faded as we stopped beside a half-closed door. Through the narrow gap, I heard my father's voice, calm, deliberate. "Just make sure she drinks it. No scene, no trouble." My mother's reply came sharp and certain. "It'll be quick. She'll just seem faint from the champagne." Then Vela's unmistakable tone. "I'll cue the toast." The words sank in, cold and heavy. My pulse quickened, but I forced my breathing to stay even. I memorized every syllable. Without looking down, I caught Hollis's subtle movement, a tap on their phone, proof that it was all being recorded. I stepped back, letting the door close without a sound. The phrase I'd read once in a courtroom memoir drifted into my mind. Never go into a fight without evidence in your pocket. When we returned to the main room, I wore the same composed smile I'd been carrying all night. Guests were applauding at one of the center tables. Cyrene was standing there, handing a neatly wrapped package to my former professor, who beamed as he unwrapped it. It took me less than a second to recognize the gift. The leather-bound first edition, the one I'd tracked down months ago, ordered from a tiny shop in Vermont. I had included a handwritten note on cream stationery, now gone. "I searched high and low for this," Cyrene was telling the table, her voice warm with self-satisfaction. "I knew it was the perfect gift." Applause circled again. I stayed where I was, clapping politely. Outwardly, nothing changed. Inwardly, I filed it away. One more theft, dressed in a smile and wrapped with a bow. The lights dimmed slightly as Vela took the microphone, her sequined dress catching the glow. She began thanking guests for making the evening truly unforgettable, her words rolling with practiced ease. I tightened my grip on my clutch. If they were about to spring their trap, they'd find I was ready to turn it inside out. Vela's voice floated from the stage, smooth and bright. "Before we conclude this wonderful evening, let's raise a glass to the graduate." Servers glided between tables, placing champagne flutes at every setting. The precision of it all was almost theatrical. I sat still, my eyes scanning the movement around me. My parents weren't mingling now, they were watching me. Every time my gaze swept in their direction, they were already looking, their expressions politely fixed for anyone who might notice. When the server approached our table, I leaned back slightly to give them room. The glass was set just to my right, the pale gold liquid catching the warm light overhead. Moments later, Grady appeared beside me, smiling down as though checking that my place was in order. His hand moved toward my silverware, a casual adjustment, and in my peripheral vision, I saw it. Something small, almost invisible, drop into my champagne. The faintest fizz broke the surface before disappearing. I didn't flinch, not a blink. Hollis's recording was my insurance, but the rest would be my choice. I let my fingers rest lightly on the stem of the glass, feeling its chill. I rose slowly, letting the moment stretch, and glanced toward Cyrene's table. She was laughing with the couple next to her, head tilted, oblivious to anything beyond her own glow. I crossed the few steps between us, glass in hand, my voice bright enough to carry to those nearby. "Oh, I think you got my glass. Yours is probably warmer." Her brows lifted. "Really? You're picky tonight." "You know me," I said with a smile that didn't touch my eyes. She laughed lightly, switching glasses without hesitation. The people around us chuckled, thinking it nothing more than harmless sibling banter. I returned to my seat, raising the now safe glass just as Vela cued the toast. My gaze swept the room. Cyrene taking a generous sip, Grady's jaw tightening almost imperceptibly, Noella's smile locked in place, but empty in her eyes. The toast carried on, voices lifting in unison, glasses clinking. Cyrene's laughter joined theirs, but only for a moment, then it faltered, her hand coming to rest lightly on the table. Inside my head, the words were calm, measured. The clock just started ticking. Cyrene set her glass down, still mid-laugh at something the man beside her had said, but the sound cut off as if someone had pulled a plug. Her smile froze, eyes blinking rapidly. She shifted in her chair, one hand braced on the table, then started to push herself up. Her knees didn't cooperate. She wobbled, grabbed for the tablecloth, and instead caught the edge of a plate. Silverware clattered to the floor, a fork spinning across the marble like a coin. Gasps rippled outward as chairs scraped and several guests surged to their feet. Grady was there in an instant, one arm around her back, the other gripping her forearm. "Cyrene, look at me. You're fine. Just sit." His voice carried just enough for people nearby to hear the concern. Noella swept in from the other side, pressing her hand to Cyrene's shoulder, her expression the perfect picture of maternal alarm. "Sweetheart, breathe. You probably just stood too fast." But I saw it. The fleeting flash of panic in their eyes, the silent communication between them that didn't match the words coming out of their mouths. I stayed in my seat, posture relaxed, glass in hand. On the surface, I was a quiet observer, but inside I felt the momentum shift, a current changing direction. The murmurs in the room grew, eyes darting from Cyrene to me and back again. I noted every one of them, Vela, lingering in the periphery, my professor frowning as though piecing something together, two cousins who'd avoided me all night suddenly watching like they'd been waiting for this. Then Hollis was beside me, moving in with the ease of someone who belonged. They didn't sit. Instead, they leaned slightly, phone in hand, screen tilted so only I could see. "You'll want to see this now," they murmured. The video was crystal clear. Grady's hand slipping something into my champagne while pretending to straighten my fork. The faint swirl in the glass, then me stepping toward Cyrene, the smile, the swap, her taking the glass without hesitation, every detail preserved in perfect sequence. I let the phone rest in my palm, thumb hovering over the screen. I could end it right here. Stand, raise my voice, show everyone exactly what had happened. It would be quick, decisive, but it would also be messy, and they would spin it before the shock even settled. Better to let them think they still had the upper hand. The longer they believed it, the sharper the fall. Cyrene was back in her chair now, a napkin pressed to her lips, her complexion pale. A waiter hurried past toward the front entrance, calling for medical assistance. Across the room, Grady bent his head close to Noella's, speaking in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. Her eyes flicked toward me for the briefest moment before returning to Cyrene. I leaned toward Hollis, handing the phone back without looking down again. "Keep that video safe," I said quietly. "We're not done yet." The ballroom was in chaos, half the guests craning to see what was happening to Cyrene, the other half murmuring in hushed disbelief. Paramedics pushed through the crowd, their bags swinging at their sides, while servers tried to clear plates without drawing more attention. It was the perfect distraction. I rose from my seat with a steady calm that belied the electricity under my skin. This was the moment. I moved toward the AV booth tucked in the corner, my heels soundless on the carpet. The technician looked up, startled, as I slipped a small USB drive into his hand. "Play this," I said quietly, my gaze holding his until he nodded. The screen above the stage flickered, the image from the slideshow vanishing mid-frame. A different video bloomed into view, one far less flattering to my family. First, Grady leaning over my place setting, his hand hovering like he was adjusting a fork. Then the subtle tilt of his fingers, the grainy outline of a packet disappearing into the golden liquid of my champagne, the faint fizz that followed. Next, me crossing to Cyrene's table, smiling, the easy exchange of glasses. Cyrene lifting it without hesitation. In the corner of the video, the timestamp glowed, perfectly matching the evening's timeline. The sound in the room fractured, gasps, sharp whispers, the rustle of chairs. Vela's face drained of color. Noella's hand froze mid-gesture, the half-empty flute poised between her fingers. Grady clenched his jaw, his expression locked in place, but he didn't move. Somewhere behind me, a voice cut through the noise. "That's attempted poisoning." Phones appeared in hands like magic. Screens lit up, recording, texting, sending. The paramedics paused, glancing between Cyrene and the massive screen, their eyes narrowing. Then, cutting through the rising tide, came my Aunt Renata's voice. "I have additional documents proving Arlena paid her own way through college, and that these two have been lying to everyone here for years." Heads turned as she stepped forward, holding the same envelope she'd given me earlier. She opened it for all to see, the papers crisp under the lights. Scholarships, grants, bank records, the truth they've worked so hard to bury. It was like a current ran through the room. People who'd been carefully neutral all night shifted away from Grady and Noella, their expressions changing from polite to guarded. I stepped forward then, my voice steady and even. "My whole life, I've been told to stay quiet. Tonight, you saw why. Silence is how they win." I let the words hang there, the weight of them settling into the air, before stepping back. The evidence on the screen, the documents in Renata's hands, they could speak for themselves now. From the doorway, uniformed police appeared, scanning the crowd for the names that had just been burned into everyone's memory. My parents turned toward each other, their eyes locking for the briefest moment, an unspoken conversation passing between them. Then the officers started forward. The ballroom still hummed with leftover shock from the video, voices dropping to low murmurs whenever my name or my parents drifted into the air. Some people avoided meeting my eyes entirely, suddenly fascinated with their half-empty glasses. Others gave subtle nods as I passed, quiet acknowledgments from those who'd been watching closely all night. 2 uniformed officers had arrived, moving with purpose. One approached my father, the other my mother, separating them with a practiced efficiency. Grady's voice was low, tight, arguing under his breath. Noella's composure was beginning to fray, her smile cracking into something sharper. I walked toward the main table. Conversations softened, then faded completely. Every step I took seemed to pull more attention in my direction. When I reached the center, I set down the small bundle I'd been carrying, the keys to the house, the family crest pendant they loved to parade at formal events, and an envelope containing my signed withdrawal from every shared asset. "These belong to you," I said, my voice calm but carrying. "I'm taking back my name, my time, and my life." The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Somewhere in the back, a voice murmured, "Good for her." Renata, standing near the edge of the crowd, gave me a small, approving smile, one that said she'd been waiting years to see this moment. Hollis, ever watchful, raised their phone just enough to capture the scene. I looked at the objects on the table. For so long, they'd been symbols of belonging, even pride. Now, they were nothing but anchors. The weight I felt lifting wasn't from their absence, it was from letting go of what they represented. My grandmother's words came back to me, clear as if she were standing beside me. "Don't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm." I had been burning quietly for years, thinking that endurance was the same as loyalty. I turned from the table and began walking toward the exit. Not hurried, not retreating. Every step was deliberate. Behind me, the flurry of police questions rose again. I didn't turn to look. When I reached the glass doors of the hotel lobby, I caught my reflection, shoulders squared, head high. I almost didn't recognize the woman staring back, but I liked her better than the one who'd walked in a few hours ago. Outside, the night air wrapped around me. Hollis caught up, falling into step beside me. "You know this isn't over yet," they said quietly. I glanced back once at the glowing windows of the ballroom. I know. A week after the party, the air on the pier felt different. Open, clean, without the weight I'd been carrying for years. The sun was low over Puget Sound, casting a golden shimmer across the water. I walked slowly, my hands in my coat pockets, letting the steady rhythm of the waves drown out the memory of clinking glasses and forced smiles. By the next morning after the ballroom, the video had been everywhere. Hollis had sent it to a reporter before we'd even left the hotel, and by breakfast, local stations were running it alongside headlines that made my last name feel foreign. Strangers on the street stopped mid-step, staring at their phones. My parents' carefully crafted image had shattered in a matter of hours. The legal fallout came first. Charges of attempted poisoning and conspiracy were filed before the week was over. Cyrene's condition stabilized. She would recover physically, but the narrative about her being an innocent caught in the crossfire didn't hold. Too many people had seen her bask in my parents' lies over the years. Social consequences followed quickly. Business partners withdrew from joint ventures. Sponsors for their charity galas backed out, citing a need to reassess affiliations. Invitations that once flooded their calendar dried up. The same people who had smiled at them under the ballroom chandeliers now kept their distance. Meanwhile, I moved into a small apartment near the university district, boxes stacked against the walls, the scent of fresh paint still in the air. It wasn't large, but it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned without their interference. I started consulting for an environmental engineering firm, the kind of work that didn't need a family name attached to carry weight. I kept thinking about a line I'd heard years ago. You can't start the next chapter of your life if you keep rereading the last one. It became my mantra. The final break came during a mediated settlement meeting downtown. They arrived with their lawyer, both dressed as if for another gala, trying to hold on to the last shreds of control. I laid a signed legal document on the table, a formal declaration that I relinquished any claim to the family estate, with clauses preventing them from using my name or any of my achievements for social gain. This, I said, sliding the papers toward them, is the last time you'll ever profit from my existence. Noela's lips parted like she might object, but I was already standing. Grady didn't speak at all, just stared at the document as though it had burned his hands. I walked out without waiting for their signatures. Out on the street, the air was sharp and cool. I felt taller, lighter, not because the past had vanished, but because it no longer dictated my every step. I had fought, and this time, I had won on my terms. Later that evening, I boarded the ferry, standing at the rail as the skyline began to shrink behind me. The city lights reflected on the water, breaking into pieces with every ripple. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the sound of a door closing for the last time, because once you've learned to walk away, you start to see just how far you can go.